Hello, this is Václav and this is yet another video about the Midilooper, and in this video we're going to walk through the playback modifiers, which is the left side of the looper. So these allow you to work with the recorded material and do some basic operations to them. However, then they can really unlock your creativity because they pair really well with the CV inputs, so you can find your own ways how to work with MIDI a little bit more creatively, and I think they allow you to do things that would be like really hard to do otherwise. So let me briefly describe the setup I have here. So I've got this keyboard on the Yamaha synth. It has local control turned off, which means the keyboard will not play the synth engine. By default, it will play it through the MIDI loop. So the keyboard MIDI out is connected to the MIDI in of the Midilooper, and the output of the Midilooper goes to the MIDI input of the synth. So, and that is on the voice A. Then from the second MIDI output, the MIDI goes into this box that you can't really see well, but there's not much need to, just that you know it's here. It's like a rack unit that does piano sounds, and I'm using it to do this E piano sound. And from that, this rack unit has a MIDI through, so from the MIDI through, it forwards the MIDI into the O coast. So the O coast is here, voice B, making these nice bass sounds. And then I have the drum machine, the Roland drum machine that is sending MIDI clock into the MIDI clock input. That's via the mini jack, so it goes through an adapter, and that's how everything is synchronized to the drum machine. So let me show you how this setup sounds. Good, so this is the setup. So the first thing we'll talk about, we've already talked about this in the previous video, but since it's on the left side of the unit, let's repeat it, doesn't hurt. But the mechanics of using this applies in the bigger picture to most of the playback modifiers, how you set things up. So the first one is the length. And that's basically the length of the loop, and I can set the length of the loop globally or per voice. So now I have this quite long chord progression, which when I hold the length, you see it's showing 16. It's 16 beats, which is 4 bars, and I can go when I'm using these, then the record and play stop are like up and down arrows. So if I go to 8 and release it, it will actually shorten now the whole loop just to 2 bars, right? I can go to 4, make it even shorter, or go back to 16 and have the original loop. I can even go further and then record some further material. I can make it longer, no problem. So this is how, by default, if you just hold that, it's doing it globally, does it for all voices. But let's say I would only want to shorten the bass voice, because I didn't like the second half of it and it can repeat. So I would hold length, the bass voice, and go to 8. I can also go to the E-piano sound and maybe like, let's put something, I don't know, maybe like 6 beats. So now there is some sort of polyrhythm going on. So like this you can set it like per voice. Each voice could be different amount of beats. Let's change it to 7 maybe, so it's even less repeating on the, yeah. So this is the length, I think that's quite useful. So the length, it doesn't really allow you to go all the numbers, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It skips some and then it goes in increments of 8. So it doesn't allow you all the options, but there is most of the interesting ones are there for you to try. That might change, however, so we'll see. Maybe we have some mathematicians and maybe we'll do a mode where there's like a lot more definition. So now for the ease of access and sort of like, so you don't have to scroll through all the numbers, it just gives you the basic access. So this is the length. Again, setting it, holding the button up and down, sets it globally. It becomes active the moment I release the button. And if I hold voice with it, it sets it only per that voice. Good, so now let's move on and let's talk about the next button, and it's the quantize button. So let's make some arpeggio. So now the O-coast is doing the arpeggio. So you can hear I wasn't super on time, no problem. I hit the quantize. And it's quantized. Nice. So when I'm holding quantize, it shows me 16. That means it's quantized to 16th notes. I can easily go to 8 notes. So it kind of leaves out some of those, or it kind of plays them at the same time. But because it's monophonic, you can't really hear that. I can go to quarter notes. Back to 16th notes. I can go even finer, 32, that's quite nice. Or I can go to 0, which means unquantized. The reason for that will become a bit more apparent in a second. When I go above the quarter notes, that is 3, which is actually triplets, which I really like. So you get this like shuffly feel. Or 6 is sextuplets, so it's a bit more finer, but it's like on the triplet grid. Or if you work with triplets, this is cool. Or just like by modifying your material, you can get some like nice timing effects like that. Yeah. And you can just turn off the quantize. It's unquantized. Pressing it once basically just turns it on or off. Cool. So now let's add maybe a bit of the E-piano. Not the best playing, but let's say now I I would like to have the O-coast quantized, but not the E-piano, because I was playing this sort of like off-griddy, like slide type playing. So if I go to quantize, and so now everything quantized to quarter notes, but if I hold the voice, which is now the E-piano, I can go to 0, which would make that unquantized. So that's 0. I can go and hold the quantize for the O-coast, put it on the triplet grid. Nice. Yeah. So again, holding quantize up and down, it does it globally. Holding quantize and a voice, it does it only for that voice. Good. So this is quantize. The next up is velocity. So velocity is it has a little similar logic to quantize. When you hit quantize, it just locks things to grid. When you enable velocity, it locks the velocity to specific value. So let me show you that. It's easiest to show on the E-piano because it's very dynamic. So I recorded this like a very dynamic sequence, but then if I enable velocity, all the notes would be the same velocity. So it's like a velocity lock, you can think of it that way. But what it allows me to do is when I'm holding it, now it shows me 5, I think it's a scale from like 0 to 10 or something. I can actually go and set it lower. So I can basically do sort of like a velocity based fade out, which is like really nice when you have, I don't know, these type of sounds or piano type of sounds. The velocity doesn't just affect the level, so just turning down the volume wouldn't have the same effect, but I think this is quite useful. And also, now it's good to mention that you can also control the velocity with CV, so you can actually add CVs to the CV velocity input, and it increases the velocity. So the velocity log would be handy to like log the velocity somewhere low and then modulate the velocity with an LFO or something like that. So that's, I think that's one of the things that would be like really hard to do otherwise. And again, velocity up and down changes the velocity for all the voices. Holding velocity and the voice would change the velocity only for that voice. So none of the other synths really respond to velocity. I mean, the no O-coast does, but I would have to patch it up. So again, that works for all: length, quantize, and velocity. If I hold it, go up and down, changes the setting globally. Holding the button and holding voice up and down, it changes it only for that voice. So the next mode, or the next playback modifier, is transpose, and it's a little bit different than the others because it's sort of like a transpose mode. So let me just make some sort of sequence again. Let's just make it one chord. It's kind of the most useful. Okay, so now when I go to the transpose mode, it's like selecting like a fourth voice. So leaving it, I press one of the ABC buttons, and if I press transpose, it sends TR, I'm in the transpose mode. So basically, the transpose mode is listening to the CV, to the MIDI input, and takes that information to alter what is being played back. So in the transpose mode, the first thing you have to do is you have to set your root note. And I was playing in C minor, so for me C would be the root note. And that's quite useful to have some sort of reference from which you are transposing. So I set the root note to C in this octave, and that's done by, like, you hold it, it says RT, like root note, and then the little dots, they light up as soon as you learn a root note. And then only after then you can actually use the transpose mode. So this is my root note. So pressing the root note doesn't really do anything, but pressing a C octave higher transposes everything an octave higher, going to G. So basically this is how it works. If I go lower from that C, going back. So this is sort of like a live transpose mode. So this is like the first implementation, and I'm trying to say it in every video. The Midilooper is like sort of like one of its kind. There is not like much other instruments to look at when we were designing this. So I think there is a lot of opportunity for you to give us feedback, like how would you want the transpose mode to work. So it's quite open still. This is like the basic implementation. I have some ideas. Some people told me already ideas, but I want to hear from you as well. It's best that you send us an email. You can also leave it in the comments. I will also go through those. Yeah, we'll also send like a questionnaire to everybody who bought the Midilooper in the first batch. So we'll be asking the broader pool of users than just our testers. So important thing to know about the transpose mode is that as soon as, okay, I transpose it really high so you can hear it. As soon as I leave the mode, which means I will select one of the voices, that's how you leave the mode, select another voice, the transposition is gone. So if you want to be transposed, you need to be in the transpose mode. Okay. So you can transpose by any number of semitones. You can do the modulation, you know, like Michael Jackson or whoever. Easy. So now we're getting, so these are the 4 main modifiers, and then there is like the second layer with the function button. There's the octave, transpose, humanize, shuffle, and stretch. So let's look at those. So to operate these, I think they all only work globally at the moment, which is something we would like to change, especially for the stretch, but I'll get to that. So at this point, actually no, not all of them work globally. The octave transpose doesn't. I was already explaining that in the earlier video. So you can set octave transpose for each instrument, so when you change voices, you don't need to change octaves. So that's quite useful, but you can also use it performatively. So I have this chord, this synth chord, and I can go function, transpose. Now I can transpose it 2 octaves higher, 3 octaves higher, 4 octaves higher, or to 0. So there was some offset already. So basically I can also go to the E piano, also transpose that. I can go to the bass voice and transpose it like really high, or go back to 0. So that's the octave transpose. So the octave transpose, basically I select a voice, hold function, transpose, and up and down I'm changing the octave in which the voice is playing. So this is meant for two things. First, each voice could be in a different octave, and I wouldn't need to mess with the octave switch on my keyboard at all because it would be set. And then second, you can also use it like this performatively. Alright, the next one is, let's go from the top again, the stretch. It's time stretching. So basically, I have recorded this material and maybe I want it to go like twice faster or twice slower. So if I go function, length, it's time stretching. So if I go up, it's twice faster. 4 times faster. Zero is the original. -2 is half the speed, and -4 is quarter of the speed. So that is time stretching. At this point, it only works globally. We want to make it work also per each voice individually, which is not possible at the moment, but this will be implemented in one of the future firmware updates that will be free and will also contain some potential bug fixes and also have some user requests. So this one was like one of the main user requests from the testing pool, but we were not really in time to finish it for the release, so it's gonna be in the update. So the next one from the top is shuffle. So if I hold function and quantize, there was some shuffle already. So if the shuffle is 0, there's no shuffle. And going up, it actually increases like a normal swing. Let's do something different so it's easier to hear. This one. So if I function quantize, and if I increase it, it delays every second 16th note, so it's like the swing basically. But what's interesting about the shuffle is I can go negative, and negative shuffle here actually adds random delays, different amounts of random delays to the MIDI notes that are being sent. So I think that's quite nice. So I'll reset it back to 0. Okay, so now that we're at this voice, the next up is human or humanize. So humanize is like a velocity operation, and it can add random velocity variation to the recorded material. So if I hold it, it says H0, I can go to H4, and it randomly adds accents to the recorded material. I can go and make it like a really extreme. So this is something to give a bit of more life to the recorded material, so not every repetition is exactly the same. It's really nice when used with the velocity log. So for instance, what I can do is I can go to velocity and pretty much like say the velocity is 0. And now if I add humanize, is it gonna work? No, I think the velocity has to be 1. But basically it's gonna apply some sort of probability on like if the note is going to go through or not. So that is the humanize. I think that's also nice to use with the CV input. So I'll turn it back down to 0. Okay, so these are the basic playback modifiers. They are grouped, so they kind of do similar operation but have a different twist on it. So the length sets the length of the loop, and stretch plays it at half or double speed. Quantize puts notes on the grid, and shuffle further like moves them off the grid. Velocity locks the velocity to specific value, and humanize randomizes like that value. Transpose mode is a little different, so that's using the live input of your MIDI keyboard to change things up, and the static octave offset just changes the octave of each voice. So now let's talk about the CV inputs here, and I think they are quite interesting because you can do just interesting stuff. So the first one in here is called the retrigger, and I will connect trigger from the drum machine into the retrigger input, and switch it here so I can be programming it. So clear this. So the retrigger will basically take what you play, and it will restart the envelope. It will send MIDI note off and MIDI note on. Okay, so I think we talked about this in the previous video. To activate one of the CV inputs for each voice, you hold the voice for 5 seconds, and then you hit the button closest to that voice. So now I just activated the retrigger for this voice. So there is some sort of trigger sequence here that's sending pulses into the retrigger mode. Okay, so it's sort of like an arpeggiator of some sort. So it will always take a group of notes that I play together. I call it in the manual that I play them legato. If I play just one note, it retriggers that note, but it remembers the last played note. If I play it with G, it will do that. If I play a chord, it will do it. It will play all the notes played in legato. And of course this also applies to the recorded material. So I can this is the retrigger. I think it's quite fun to do it with maybe like an LFO. That would be fun. Let's try how it works. So what I can be doing now is I will now go and use the velocity CV input. So I believe this would give me the access to velocity. Oops, okay. So first I need to go to that to this voice and activate the CV input for the velocity. So, okay. So now the OCOS is retriggering the chord, and I will use the CV input on the velocity to modulate the velocity. It takes only positive voltages. It should already do maybe the cable. Maybe the cable doesn't work. Wait, how do you do this? Okay, so so what I was confused about by now is that the velocity input works for the recorded material, so it doesn't really work for the live playback, because when you play live, it just, you know, repeats what you've played. So I'll stop this and record like a little sequence. Yeah, we can lower the velocity offset. Okay. And then with this CV, I can be modulating. I can be basically modulating the velocity. So I think I can go from this LFO and use like an LFO, make it slower. So now I'm basically using the LFO on the OCOS to modulate the velocity of the material that I've recorded. So I think that's quite nice. Let me show you the transpose input really briefly. The transpose input, basically it is what it says it is. So it takes voltage and uses that voltage to transpose the recorded material. So okay, so I will again need to hold the voice for like 5 seconds and activate the CV input. And now I connected like a random voltage into there. So basically now it's playing a random melody because it transposes the recorded material randomly. But if you have like a volt per octave source, you can totally do that. Okay, so each of those CV inputs could be either activated or deactivated for every single voice. So I can have, let's say, the retrigger trigger only voice B or C, and have the velocity only affect one of the other voices. So this is what you do again by holding the voice for 5 seconds, and now you're in this menu where you like activate or deactivate the operation of the CV input on every voice. Now, I think I've already shown you in the previous video, but since we're talking about these and you might be looking for that information, I will also show you how you use simple button or a foot switch. It's actually designed for any like sustain pedal. You just need to like downscale it to be 3.5 millimeters. And these three inputs, they have alternate function that they can be used for foot control. So this button I have here on the cable, it's just basically showing, it's doing the same thing as any sustain pedal would do. It just makes contact between the sleeve and the tip. And this second option, like a record, clear or changing voice by foot switches, is active only when the CV input is not activated for any of the voices. So I will go and hold each for 5 seconds and deactivate all the CV inputs if there were any. Okay, deactivate that. Cool, so now all three of those inputs are set to be foot switches. So when I connect the button here to the voice input now, flipping the button would basically cycle through the three voices. Going into the clear input would basically, it's like hitting the clear button. Okay, when I hit it twice, it clears all voices. And going into the record input, it basically operates the record button. Okay, is it plugged in? Yeah, turning record on and off. So this is how you use those. The metronome output just outputs a metronome. And yeah, I think that this might be it for this video. As I said, we're really looking for your feedback on how these work, and I'm sure already you have ideas. Oh, can I do this? Can I do that? I really want to hear like how you want to use this, and if we can make it fit to work with this interface and with this machine and possible like firmware updates. So this was the video about the playback modifiers and the CV inputs, and yeah, thanks for staying till the end, and I'll see you in the next video.